Because when I think of most of the Black men who I know, whether that's professionally, a lot of their younger years below 35, it was about survival. They may not have had any encouragement for their dreams. Hey, y'all, welcome back to the Fast Forward podcast. I am continuing my month-long discussions with some incredible Black men who I have the privilege of knowing. This time, I got somebody who is from my hometown. Now, first of all, y'all already know how hard I go for Detroit, Michigan. Not a game to me, it's in us, not on us. And so I am particularly excited to bring on this voice, not only because he is from Detroit too, but that's really important, but because a lot of the conversation around Black manhood that I see, and even in academic circles and professional circles, it talks a lot about how to engage younger Black men and younger Black males, teenagers, and even children. But it is so important to think about the experiences of Black men over 35, and especially Black men who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and beyond. So I wanted to bring on a voice who I would consider an authority on this and who I think has a really unique perspective. And I think you are going to love this conversation. If you are a Black man and you love a Black man, please, please tune in. I can't wait to hear y'all thoughts in the comments because I think you're going to get some great insights. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Klay S. Williams. Klay, please tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a fun fact.
Sure. So first of all, Kaylin, thank you so much for inviting me onto this podcast. I am so excited to be here and congratulations on all that you are doing. So I am a purpose and wellness coach for older adults. And so what that actually looks like is I help older adults transition from their traditional retirement into their next chapter. And so it's looking at what were some of their past understandings from what their vocation was in their life. What are some things that they enjoyed about it? What are some things that they wanted to shift and change? And so we look at it from a holistic model. We're not just trying to help them understand, okay, I'm now in retirement. What is it that, I want to do? How do we bring all chapters of your life together, do some healing work if that is necessary for you to fully understand who you are and want to be in this next chapter of life? And so I do that through trainer programs, through one-on-one consultations, and recently a pilot film that we're so excited about called Just Beginning.
I was smiling as you described the work that you do and really the purpose-filled work that you do. Because when I think of most of the Black men who I know, whether that's professionally, even personally, the men in my family, a lot of their younger years below 35, it was about survival. It was about trying to survive the sociocultural conditions in which they were born. It was about trying to create a survival strategy for their families, whether it was their children and their partner, or even their other family members, parents, siblings, etc. And so when you talk about being able to capture the dreams, the hopes, the experiences of all the chapters of their lives, that is so important because there may not have been time for them to dream. There may not have been space. They may not have had any encouragement for their dreams. It may have simply been, this is what we need to do in order to get to the next level or just to make it from day to day. So I can appreciate this work so much, especially for older adults who they kind of get to be a kid again. They get to engage in play and dreaming and daydreaming and excitement. And the process, though, of learning to unpack and detach from all the voices of years and years of experiences that may have told them, no, you can't, or no, this isn't a possibility. So how is that, how do you manage that process, right? Because it's not like you're talking to a 10-year-old where it's like, I'm going to be an astronaut and a lawyer and I'm going to have an organic farm. And it's like, yeah, okay, little Johnny, perfect. But you might be talking to a 60-year-old who, even the simplest of dreams, I want to own a home, that felt out of reach for so long. And so now to have somebody try to add spark back to that, that's a process. How do you manage that process with them?
It's so interesting that you say that because in the actual pilot film, one of the protagonists, she literally says, I have done just anything I could do just to get to this age, to just get to retirement. So much so that there's a lot riding on this retirement. For once, I'm going to get to feel and be a person because I just had to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And so even that childhood comment that you just shared, there's an article, and I'm getting to your answer in a roundabout way, but there's an article that came out in Time magazine that talks about how older adults get a chance to go back to play after they retire and have some of those childhood sensibilities. And so all this to say is I meet people where they are and I become sort of an avatar for them. I support them in being able to mirror back what it is that not only what they're saying, but what they have experienced.
Yes.
Sometimes we need people to be able to help us go to the start. And so I always reverse engineer. I'm not asking you what are your purpose and your dreams right now as you see it. We need to figure out how to close the gap between your past and present, assess if there's any healing work that needs to happen, because chances are, if there's some things that we need to work on around like behavior change or work on around mindset, growth mindset shifts or healing work, the chances of who you think you're going to be at this particular point, and it's all going to change after you've had a chance to do that work. And
Yes.
so what has been a constant norm is, people, they will come, I'm not here for this. I came to you for that. I know what the vision is. And it's like, okay, let's just reinforce and make sure that it actually is the vision. Once we do that work, it's never, ever the same. And so we start with who do you think you are at this particular point? We
Yes.
started the exercises of assessing and then create the path to support you in the dream of who you truly authentically want to be.
I like three things came up when you said that. So let me try to unpack that little by little. First, I'm so happy that you are not put off as a coach by the initial responses and resistance. So as a person who is a professional coach as well, when I'm mentoring new coaches and teaching emerging coaches, some of this is our own self-control. And that's a part of emotional intelligence, to be honest, is self-management, because people leverage resistance as a defense mechanism.
Yes.
Right? Because again, you talking to somebody who you may be the first person in their life ever who said, well, what you want to do? Okay, we could do that. They may have never had that experience. And if you think about the hundreds and thousands of people who we interact with, in some cases, tens of thousands over our lifetime, that's a lot of no's to finally get to one person to say yes. And so when your client is saying, no, I don't want to do that. I didn't come for that. That's a defense mechanism, because they may have spent months even building the readiness to have a conversation with you, and they only carved out enough emotional space to be able to get to the one thing they said they want to do with you. So when you say something else, it's hitting on the vulnerable part of them where they're like, I ain't here for that. I didn't prepare myself.
That's right.
Talk about that. So I would encourage, especially the coaches out there, and I might drop this in the comments, study like actual defense mechanisms. There are 9, according to Freudian psychology, and they have very distinct definitions. As a coach, it is very helpful for you to become well versed in understanding those defense mechanisms so that you don't personalize your client's resistance. All right, that's one. 2, what came up was it made me remember an experience I had with my uncle. So when my business first started booming, and it happened with several of my aunts and uncles, but I'm going to take my uncle because this conversation is about Black men. And so I adore my father's brothers. He has 2. One of them, unfortunately, has passed on. There's one still living. They were my father growing up. My father was like a deadbeat intentionally. He just did not mess with me like that. But his family showed up for me, his parents and his siblings. This uncle, both of my uncles, they would make sure I had glasses so that I could see and go to school, school shoes, uniforms, field trips, letterman jacket, like all the things to make sure that in their words, you just worry about going to school. Forget what your daddy doing, forget what your mama doing, you just go to school. And so when I started getting a little bit of money, I'm like, sure, I want to do nice stuff for them because again, you talking about people who I come from a working class background. You know, it's Detroit. So where do my uncles work? The plant. They work for the big three.
Come on.
Come on, because you already know. And this uncle, he actually still works for the big three. I talk about him all the time on this podcast. So anyway, I was like, I want to do something fun for my uncle for his birthday. His birthday was coming up in July. And I was like, well, what you doing? He was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I might take time off. And I was like, what you mean you might? Like, for me, my birthday is like a month-long holiday. So we turning it up from like mid-March to mid-April for March 27th. Okay. And so I'm like, what you mean? And he was like, I don't take time off work. And I was like, wait, what? What you mean you don't take time off work? But it was very much that mentality of like, I got to take care of my family. I go to work, period, even now. And so I was like, no, you got to celebrate. And so I decided, I was like, I want to take my uncle to Anita Baker's concert. This is when she came to Detroit a few years ago.
Yeah.
And come to find out, my auntie, his wife, she loves Anita Baker. I never knew that. So in my head, I'm like, oh, now we got to make this like a production.
Family affair.
Period. I'm like, oh, we finna go in. So I tried to get us really, really good seats to make sure they was like in a dope section. I took us to this beautiful steak restaurant, shout out to Prime and Proper in the city. And I was like, hold on, I'm about to rent a limo for us. So I do research. Now, y'all know I live in Atlanta, so I'm doing research. I was like, I want us to have a real nice limo. I found this dope company, Klay, that they customized a limo out of a Rolls Royce. It was a stretch Rolls Royce limo.
Wow.
So I came into town again. So I got this whole night set up for us. I was like, I'm finna surprise him. I ain't gonna tell him. So he was like, yeah, I could drive us down there and we just pay for part. I'm like, no. I was like, oh no, I got a ride for us. So he thinking I like rented a little car. I played it off and told the limo driver, like, pull up, I'm a hat in the back and you act like you at the wrong house. So the limo driver was so excited I was doing this. He was a black man and he told me, because I took an Uber down from, I was in Ann Arbor because I was getting some work done too. I was on Michigan's campus, my alma mater, doing some stuff for research. So I took an Uber and had the limo driver meet me a few blocks away so my uncle wouldn't even see me. And when I got in the car, he was like, you know, what you doing this for? Because it's not prime, right? We in summer. And I was like, oh, it's my uncle's birthday. I love my uncle. And he was like, wait, you just doing it because it's your uncle? I'm like, yeah, it's my uncle. And he was like, I have never seen our people do something like this unless it was prom or what. He was like, can I get in on the surprise? I'm like, okay. So now he coming up with a script. He like, okay, so we gonna do this. And here we go. I'm like, I bet. So he pulls up. And of course, you know, folks be nosy. So they like, who is this? Pulling up in his limo. So my auntie comes to the door and she like, you know, you looking for who? No, I think you got the wrong house. So now my uncle like, who is that? Because he tried to figure out who at the door talking to his wife. Somebody like, no, ain't nobody order a limo. And I jump out and I'm like, I did. And they were so shocked. So we taking pictures. I'm going to put some pictures. I'm going to ask my auntie and uncle first. But if they say yes, I'm going to put these pictures in this episode. And they were so happy. It was like a different joy. So we drinking champagne in the back of this limo again, pulling up to this restaurant. They're pulling up to the arena. So, of course, it's Detroit. So, folks know, like, hold on, we pull up in a limo outside of Little Caesars Arena. And so, that night, I just remember getting home back to the hotel and thinking in my head how grateful I was to be able to give my uncle just a fraction of the joy that he brought me when I was a child. That when I was a kid, I knew it didn't matter what I needed and what my parents couldn't do or wouldn't do. My uncles was going to make sure I was straight at all times. And I thought the gift to them was like, okay, just live a good life, right? They told me to go to school, man. I did that. Books before boys and babies, right? Like that's always the theme to the girl. I did that. But as an adult now I realized, like you said, play and whimsy and prestige and stature. I know my uncle, you know, he liked to peacock a little bit. Like this was the uncle that had a Corvette when I was a kid and used to brag. So I'm like, of course he need a limo. Like, we ain't just going to the no, we need to go to the concert. Like, this is important. And for me to be able to feed into that part of him, that made me feel so proud in a way that I didn't know I could experience. And he still talks about it. So of course he put like all the pictures on Facebook, and older folks, it's like an individual post for each. So it's like 20 posts. I'm like, Uncle, you could have just made an album, but he needed everybody to see that. And I thought in my head, I was like, wow, I wonder if anyone has celebrated him like that. Because he always celebrate other people. He always makes sure that we're all taken care of. He's always made sure that there was stability in the family for all of his nieces and nephews and just the 2 kids he had. So really, it was like him and my other uncle had 8 kids instead of just the 2 they had. And it's like those experiences for someone who is now on the other side of adulthood, right? Because they're adults, they the real adults, right? As senior citizens, for him to have a little bit of that back, that meant something to me, because he didn't have to do no work. Literally, all he had to do was just show up and chill, him and my auntie. And I want that for so many Black men. I want them to know what it's like, where it's like, you just show up and get celebrated. You just show up and experience joy. You just show up and have a great time, and you don't have to be involved with any planning. You just there kicking it. What does that do for the psyche? What does that do for your health, your mental health, your emotions?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to see that for so many other people. So that was a long story, but again, I thought of that when you were talking about this play aspect and drink. That gets me. I love my uncle so much. If my uncle get a chance to see this, I love you, Uncle Bernie. Okay, so let's get to the question. So the term community is relative, but the need for community is universal. How have you seen the idea and the need for community evolve for Black men since starting your project?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this from a coaching perspective as well as literally a day-to-day perspective. I was doing a keynote last week for a tech company, and the CEO of the tech company gave me parameters around how men in a particular culture act and how women in a particular culture act, so that I can bring my expertise to them in a way that they can receive it. Mm-hmm. And it was for a group of folks in a different country. I'll just add that caveat. And there's different hermeneutics and cultural hermeneutics that are at play, interpretations of how people experience culture. And so as I'm starting to do this keynote and these Q&A, questions afterwards, I'm like, this seems a little bit different than what the CEO, shared with me. We're getting deeper into the conversation, and the women are not speaking as much as the men. And all of a sudden, the men are just going and going and going and going. These are Black men. They're sharing so much of their experience, and so much so, we got to the end of the Q&A portion, and I said, okay, we have about 2 more minutes left. Thank you so much for having me. As I'm about to transition out of the talk, Kaylin, no, there were so many other hands. I stayed on for an additional 45 minutes to talk to these group of men in tech, engineers, IT, AI specialists. I mean, you name it, across the gamut. And so from a coaching perspective, what it said to me was, when you meet people where they are and don't make assumptions, and you invite them into their own experience. Sometimes as a coach, I think a lot of people, may get it the other way around. We're thinking we need to invite them into our experience and our methodologies. But what we are doing is inviting them to experience themselves.
Yes.
And so that forms a deeper sense of community, even just in that group. And the next person got on, I wanted to talk. Then the next person, and the next person. And here it is now. We're not only talking about how that changes like the purpose and the mission statement or amplifies the vision of a company, it also has now created community and camaraderie amongst the men. And then what happened after that? All the women started talking.
Yes.
And so the caveat of who these people were and how I should experience them was not the experience I had at all. It's just I invited them into their own experience. And then in the personal reality of it, so many men, especially Black men, are in dire need of connection, in
Yes.
dire need of being able to just say to another man, another woman, a human being, I'm hurting, I'm excited, I'm happy, I'm changing, I'm evolving, and not to have that be met with judgment.
Yes.
And when that happens, from just even a personal acknowledgement of that, our communities are shifting, they're changing, and people's voices are invited to be amplified in a brand new way. And so not only am I seeing this among Black men in a wonderful way in our personal lives, but seeing just in one keynote the difference it made. Imagine those Black men now going home to tell their children, their wives, their partners, significant others, their community, what happened to them in that keynote session. It's now going to trickle down to the people that they are experiencing in their day-to-day personal life. And it goes on and on and on and on. It's a pebble in the creek that has a rippling effect. And so if we approach community in a way that's not judgmental, it's not creating so many assumptions, Black men have an opportunity to do what one of my favorite theologians, Paul Tillich, writes about: the courage to be, the courage to just be.
Oh, I'm holding back tears. It's bringing up a lot for me. I want to unpack a few
Sure.
parts of what you said. Number one, it is so interesting that for many C-suite executives, they assume that how people show up to work is the totality of how they show up. And so, first of all, it was good that the CEO did at least try to brief you, right? Because that's just smart business. But I hope that that person got a chance to see, oh, wait, there are aspects of people who work with me, who I may have been seeing for years. I see their work product, but maybe I haven't quite been seeing them. And I think that that's a very important distinction for C-suite leaders, especially as we have more and more conversations about, well, why do people want hybrid work? Why are workers disengaged? Why is morale low? Why are people job hopping? Why don't people want to stay here? Because there are aspects of themselves that they have to hide, uh, almost like confused, right? So in my head, I pictured somebody creating like a code, right, that you have to decode and decipher on purpose so you won't see them, so that you won't see them. People are having to do that just to exist in your workplace. And as a C-suite leader, you largely have control over that. And some of it is how you model that openness. That I'm going to just leave that there, because I'll let people sit with that and then prescribe what changes they need to make from there. HR plays a role in that too, but I'm going to definitely leave that part alone. That maybe will be for March. But the second part of what you said, and I want to challenge how you even saw what your role was in that, because you showed up as the portal to themselves. So coaching, so much of coaching is mirroring, that just by existing, you get to see who you really are through your coach being fully present. And so I'm just so happy that you were willing to be there and be yourself so that people felt comfortable. And especially whoever was that first man to raise his hand and share something, to just create, again, this opening where people could feel free to come in and out and show up more fully as themselves, to give more of your time than was allotted, to have that space and openness. We don't get a lot of those environments. I think that especially for Black men, it can be scary to show up at work, like literally scary. Because first of all, it might not be a lot of y'all there, right? Second of all, in tech, it's definitely not a lot of y'all there. And in order to survive, so much of you has to be stripped and I have to think of this word. I'm going to look this word up and put it in the comments because when I see the word, I'm going to know it. But it's like, again, you have to purposely confuse how people see you just so that you're not picked apart, because it is often not a friendly environment for you. And so I just want to validate not only the Black men who have to show up in these environments and still work to thrive and belong, but also, Clay, to validate you showing up as this
Mhm.
portal and not being hearing what the CEO said, not attacking him for that perspective, but also being open and present for what the moment demanded,
Mhm.
which was an openness that they may not have ever been able to experience before. That is a powerful exchange of energy and exchange of emotional wellness,
Mhm.
because it's so needed. And that's community too.
Thank you, Kaylin. I received that. I really.
Yeah. 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 Cause it's not easy. Yeah. Okay. Let me go to question two. I can spend a lot of time on that. Maybe we go make it back to that. So, you know, this one hit me a lot. And when I was thinking about your project, and from when we had our initial conversation, part of how this came up for me is that I am keenly aware of the unprecedented mortality rates for Black men. And in particular, a lot of the mortality rates we're seeing are due to stress related illnesses and what's considered deaths of despair, where simply if you had either a more nurturing community, access to better health care, poverty wasn't an issue, you probably would still be here with your family.
That's right.
That is deeply concerning. And the ages for those mortality rates is getting younger and younger and younger. And so the question that I've been asking folks of all genders in the community is, when was the last time you saw a Black man celebrate his 60th birthday? And the fact that we are now seeing a gutting of grandfathers, right? So we had Vietnam, which went straight into the war on drugs, which went straight into gangs and, gun violence, to now the mortality rates around stress related illnesses and deaths of despair and all types of environmental, institutional racism and bias that impact the quality of life for Black men. We're not even getting to see almost a whole generation of grandfathers. We're not even getting to see the rates of Gen X granddaddies that we could see, millennial grandfathers, and that's a concern. So my question for you is, what insights can you share on the early life and young adult experiences of Black men that end up shortening their lives?
Yeah, that's such a great question. What comes to mind, especially in what I'm seeing through the Just Beginning project, is not having a space where someone teaches you what manhood is like as a young kid, a young Black kid, a young Black male. So many times you are in these positions, or the feedback that I'm receiving is you're just playing a role. And because you're playing a role, you don't have the opportunity to decide that there are other opportunities available for you. And so you grow up in a family, and because maybe dad was I'm just going to make something up, he was a mechanic, that is the role that you need to go ahead and play for the rest of your life. The other opportunities outside of that are pipe dreams. They're not something that you can actually have that's readily accessible. And so a lot of the men that I'm seeing from my project, we're having to go back to dispel restraints and to dispel behaviors that were pressed upon them, not because mom and dad were bad people, they wanted to do anything to you, or just mom, or just dad, or grandma, or grandpa, but because a lot of times they were just in the process of trying to just survive all the things you just talked about. And so when we go back and we look at that healing work, and for a lot of Black men, for sure, it really is healing work, letting go of not being fathered, letting go of not being mothered, and finding forgiveness in yourself to know it wasn't your fault that happened to you, that you did not have that experience. And so for a lot of Black men in particular, there's an exercise that we start with is growing up the little boy within. And sometimes that little boy, because of an experience that happened, and it's usually around 8, 9, and 10, something happens there that either advances your growth mindset towards what you want in the future, or it hinders it in some capacity where you grow up very defensive, very, an inability to be vulnerable with yourself and other people, and in a stance of it just is what it is. And when we go back, and I'm talking about men in their 60s and their 70s, and they're reaching back to pick up the hand of that little boy that was 10 whenever the thing happened that cast a spell over their whole entire life. We work through our sessions, and let's say maybe by week 4, week 5, he's no longer 10, maybe he's 16. And then I'm asking them the questions as we go through our healing process. How old is he now in week 12? Oh, 35. And he's 35 because these men, they knew what 35 was like for them because they experienced it then. And so when I talk about closing the gap between one's past and their present, it's why we're always reaching back towards the past to look at what childhood was like, and then the norms of adulthood that we stepped into just because we had to play a role.
Yeah.
And what happens when we go through those exercises and that work, and as an adult, you get to decide what you want that to be like, what you want your health to be like, what you want your relationships to be like, what you want your vocation at that particular point to be like. And when we close the gap between those things, both the childhood and the adulthood, it's a feeling of being whole for yourself, by yourself, just because you exist, and you get to make a choice after that.
It brought up so many memories of men who I remember, even classmates. And you're right, it is like around 8, because 8 is like second grade, third grade, where it's very clear who is the class clown or the jokester, who is the bully, who is the caretaker, who is the businessman, who is the smart one, who is the one who's good with his hand. And very rarely do we come out of those roles. And I'm thinking even of my brother. So I have siblings from my father who are much older than me. They were like almost grown when I was born, but I have one sibling from my mother. And we grew up in parallel with each other. We weren't always living in the same household, but we were always like together. And I remember, yeah, it probably was when he was like 8 or 9, because that's when his biological father is my stepfather. Him and my mom had a boomerang relationship, and he came back into our lives and started living with us full time. My brother was about 9, and that was a fundamental shift for my brother. I'm sure it was. And I'm bringing this up because now my brother has a totally different career path. He and I talk, we have a very strained relationship, but every few years or so, we'll have like a catch up conversation and do this download. And we talked a few years ago, and he was sharing, this is when he was first starting this career. And he was talking about how hard it was for him to believe in himself at first. And my initial reaction was like, well, of course you could do this. Like, because for me, as he called baby sister, but his little sister, I'm like, duh, like I always thought you were so brilliant, but he had to cut me off. And he was like, you have to understand the roles that me and you were put in as kids. The clear role and delineation was Kaylin is the quote unquote smart one, and Brandon is the one that is like the efficient one. He good with his hands. Brandon fixes things. He does this. And so, because again, we weren't always in the same household, I kind of went in my role and just went tunnel vision into what I was doing. And he did the same thing. And I didn't realize how difficult it would be for him to believe in himself in this new thing, which is drastically different than all the other, jobs and careers he's had. And he was great at those too. I told him then, I was like, I've always seen you as so brilliant. Like when we were kids, ironically again, 8, 9, and 10, my mother called it tinkering, but my brother could fix anything. We were broke, Klay, my mother and stepfather. Me and my brother had big old boom boxes, TVs, all kinds of stuff, because he would go find things in the alley, because of course it was his responsibility to take out the trash and bring it in, and he would just do 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 do. I will never. We had a big old stereo, like whoever back then, CD
Yep.
player was expensive. Whoever had this stereo, they probably thought it was broke, but I know they probably had to pay at least like $500 to $1,000 for that. Whatever my brother did, he got that thing working, and we had that. I mean, we had a whole setup. It was a big setup based off of broken things that he found in the alley. He was never taught this. Like eventually he went and got all of these certifications and things, but that was just like paperwork. He had been doing this electrician work, carpentry work, all that since he was like 8 or 9, just off the dome, gifted. And me knowing, artisanal work,
Right.
work for millions. Like, are you kidding me? But that wasn't valued in the same way in our family. And so he spent his adult life thinking that his skill set was inferior to the one he had been conditioned to think mine was because of the role that our family saw. And the whole time in my head, anybody who know me know, you ask me, man, my brother, brilliant. That dude know how to do this. You ain't got to teach him how to do it. Like, I'm gassing it up. He didn't know that I felt that way about him. But I'm like, yeah, of course. Are you kidding? Like, you know what I mean? You my brother. But I didn't know how strong those narratives were in how he thought of himself. And so when you think about most Black men and how they are conditioned to see themselves, it is, oh, so-and-so, he like the financier of the family. As long as he got money for everybody, he playing his role, he good. Well, guess what? He might not want to be the financier. That man might want to be the jokester of the fit, like, or maybe so-and-so is the jokester. Okay, but he might be real serious. Like that person might be a writer, an actor, or whatever. We prescribe Black men to these roles so early, and they never get a chance to evolve out of it. And I honestly think that eventually having to play the role with that mask is taking them out, because you can only keep up and act for so long. And that's the part that gets me, because when you talk to people, they have all these layers and interests and things that they do. And you like, oh, that's so cool. Let me hear about it. And then they almost get thrown off. Like, what you mean? Let me hear. I'm like, no, I just want to hear. Like, I'm just fascinated. But they don't have a space for that whimsy.
Kaylin, in the field interviews that we did for Just Beginning, this is before we even started recording the show, we wanted to understand more of what were the pain points that people were experiencing, the joys, the in-between, all that. Mm-hmm. There was one Black man that I was talking to. He had just turned 70 and in Virginia. His father was a sharecropper. He came from sharecroppers. They now live on land and adjacent to land that his great-great-grandfather was a slave on. And so I started off the field research interview by just asking him just one question just to see, what did you want your retirement to look like? And he said, Brother Klay, that's a deep question. And I'm recording the words, deep question. And to your point, because of all the roles, to just be asked about freedom, if retirement is freedom for you in that case, to not be able to have the authority in your voice to say what it is, but also to not even have the thought to think about what you wanted it to be and what you hope for it to be. And as the interviews were going on and on, especially with Black men in particular, it started to show up more than any other race, gender, or ethnicity. And it was just, and so even so much so after I remember after we hung up and we stayed in touch, he said, I haven't really even thought about what purpose could look like at this particular point in time because of just, going on and on. And he said, actually, I got more in me that I want to do. I need to go volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club. I need to go and I was great at mentoring one point in my life. Maybe I can teach. And he's just had this exuberance. First of all, and this is just field research interviews. I'm not doing any coaching. I'm just asking questions.
You're just asking questions.
But to your
He
point,
probably has never been asked that.
there you go. And just even being asked that question, Kaylin,
Yes.
was a sense of being invited to freedom for him. And just even in that question led to one thing. And again, I keep talking about that ripple effect of that pebble. He's now much more engaged in the community in a brand new way that matches the mindset that he, was hoping for. And so, yeah.
The word just came to me, scramble. They
Yes.
have scrambled them. So in my head, I picture when we were kids, like in cartoons, they would scramble up letters and then you would have to decode it, or like on the back of cereal box. So many Black men have to scramble themselves, even to their partners, their families. I was having a conversation with a friend at one point. This was years ago. And she was like, yeah, he said that and that. And I was like, yeah, but why would he be able to bring that to you? Like, ain't you his girlfriend? And she's like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, who else he gonna talk to? I was like, wait, but you're his partner. Like, tag you it. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, now, is he a bad person? Like, is he not keeping up? She's like, no, we good. I was like, right. You get to be that vulnerable spot, just like he is that spot for you. I was having another conversation with a colleague over dinner. We saw each other when I was in town for a conference. And she was speaking about how her husband's perspective of some of her friends in light of her entrepreneurship journey, he was suspicious of folks. And she was like, yeah, I don't think he understands. I was like, oh, no, he does. That's why he said it. I was like, clearly he done peeped something that you ain't peeped. And I was like, let me be clear on this. He is the only person in your life that the goal is for you all to go closer as one. Everybody else, you maintain a parallel life, no matter how close it is, but it's never together. Everybody is still on their own journey. I said, evidently, he done peeped something in their behaviors that you ain't noticed yet. And even if you don't just knee-jerk reaction, pay attention to that. I was like, does he support your business venture? She was like, yes, like he has been. I was like, right. He has a vested interest in making sure that you succeed because he probably sees how happy it is for you thriving. Again, he done peep something, like just pay attention.
Right.
I think for a lot of women, we don't know men's language. And I actually talked to my therapist about this one time. I was like, girl, I'm realizing like men be living in a parallel reality. Like when we sitting in environments with men, we all in the same room. They like live in a whole other like social interaction. There are things that even without saying anything, men know about other men, how to talk to other men. And as a woman, I have no clue. I can't remember what it was that triggered this aha moment. But I was like, I'm shocked by this because in my head, I'm thinking, well, we all just sitting in this room talking. And she was like, exactly. She was like, I wish more women knew that. And it was brought up in the context I was thinking about how I want to show up in dating. But I've carried that with me since then, that I can't assume to understand the needs of men because I'm not a man. And so when I'm asking questions, or should I ask questions so that they have space to tell me what's going on, to communicate to me what's going on? Because just like you said about the person you did the field interview with, just ask. You might be surprised by the answer. You don't know what the answer gonna be. You don't know what that person might be thinking. Give them space to talk and then be quiet and listen to them and trust that they are the authority on themselves.
Come on,
I think
Caitlin.
that's another issue that comes up so much for Black men because, and I found this in my dissertation research, we talk at Black men. We talk about Black men and what we think we know about Black men. But are we really talking to Black men? are we assuming that they are the authority on themselves and their lived experiences? I don't think that we are, because when they end up coming out and saying stuff, the first thing we said, well, no, that's not true. The man just told you what's going like he just said it. He just told you, fam. So why are you telling him no? Like he's saying it though. And so what I would love to do, and part of why I'm having these conversations this month, is because I'm like, can we trust Black men to be the authority on themselves? Can we give them space to really say what they need, what they're missing, and reserve judgment until we can at least hear the whole thing? That alone might bring these mortality rates way down just by being heard instead of being pushed into a prescribed role.
It reminds me of, I used to work, when I first moved to New York, I worked for, well, not first move, but a year after, I worked for a mission-based agency, and I was a communications project manager. And so we managed missions in 143 different countries. We had 11 subunits. Anything around communications you can think of is what we did. And it was a really great, thriving team. We got a request from our board of directors around our mission statement. And before it read something along the lines of, we're in mission 2, and it'll give all these different things that we're doing to help people. And so some people on the ground who were actually the missionaries who were delivering a lot of what we were doing, back here in New York, raising the funds and getting the marketing, the message out, they took issue with that. And they said, can we invite you to have a different perspective? When you say we're in mission 2, it sounds like you have something that's of power and you're giving it to someone else. And so they brought it to the comms team, and we changed the message of we're in mission with.
Yes.
And so even thinking about that from a growth mindset, Black men, Black women, instead of preaching to, instead of being in partnership to, instead of listening to get your point across to get, what about if we're listening with each other?
Yes.
What
Yes.
about if we are engaged to understand our relationship and advancement with each other? What about if we are being vulnerable with each other and inviting others to that with and not to the to? It
Yeah.
changes everything when we have that mentality. And it was that mission statement that literally gave me the methodology for the work that I would then go on and create through my business.
I love that with, because I should have power over myself, right? Like Black men should have power over themselves. And if I'm going to be honest, a lot of them don't. Man, I'm bringing up all my family little teats, but I'm, I'm thinking about my dad. So I call my stepdad my dad because, again, my biological father, he was, he was doing him. And so my stepdad, it was so clear that he didn't have the power in our whole family. Like the clear hierarchy in our family of 4 was my mama at the tippy top. Then my brother, because number one, he was a boy. He was the oldest, right? He was my mama's favorite child. Then it was me because I was her child. And then it was my dad. And it was like, well, whatever is left over from a positive family experience, cool, you got it. And it was like, he wasn't ever like with the family. When I think about a lot of our family's happy times, it was like our mama, me, and my brother, and then we would come back and like tell my dad. Like he just was not involved, right? And to be completely transparent, my father battled addiction, both alcohol and, I found out later, drugs, but he had a ton of childhood trauma, like a lot. And again, he's of that generation where it's like, yeah, you start smoking and drinking when you like 12, because that's just what everybody doing, right? It's the 60s and 70s. Like there are no limits in that same way. And I remember it hit me, I think, as a teenager, where I was like, you know, daddy really ain't got no authority in this household. And so I would try to like involve him in things, especially after my brother graduated and went to the military. And it was like such an odd dynamic for him to be thought of as like being brought into decision making of things. And I don't think he really knew how to handle that. But he and I, we were always tight again. But Child, my family dynamic was messed up. I ain't about to get into all of that.
All of
But
us have experience. Let me tell
child, okay. But me and my dad, we was always tight because we were like the underdogs
you.
of the family. And so I think he appreciated the fact that I at least tried, right? Like that I would be like, well, Dad, what you think about blah, blah, blah? Dad, I'm applying for these colleges. Look, they said this. Dad, I went on this college. Like I intentionally tried to bring him into the family dynamic. And by intentionally trying to bring him into the family dynamic, now I realize just in us talking, it was bringing him into a version of himself that I don't think he had gotten to access as a father, as an authority, as a wise person, as an adult of like, Dad, your opinion matters to me. And I wonder how that may have changed some of his behaviors. Cause like I said, this is just making me remember some things. I think, and this leads into the final question. I've thought a lot. Now this I have thought a lot about, and my brother and I, we talked about it at different points. The relationship between our mother and father. And like I said, my stepfather is his biological father. So by him was watching his two actual parents, which I think had such an interesting impact on him. But nevertheless, watching that dynamic of two dysfunctional adults try to pretend like they weren't as dysfunctional as they were to make a semblance of a functional family, which led to even more dysfunction. That has given me such an interesting lens of the relationships between Black men and Black women, because I watch how, and I've seen this, I've been married before, and what catalyzed the divorce for me was that there was an incident that happened, we were arguing, and it was like somebody was playing a tape back of my mom and dad arguing. And I was like, ooh, I was not trying to recreate this foolishness. Let me get up out of here right now. And so it's interesting because when I see how we show up as Black women, I'm like, I don't think we know how we are disempowering Black men. Because in the Black community, we do have a whole lot of social power for a number of reasons, and especially when we think about how we have to show up as a community to non-Black people. Most folks are looking at Black women as the authority. And again, that's for a number of reasons. And so I don't have any answers. Let me just start by saying that, because this is an ongoing question that I'm having. But I'm wondering, like, what is the role that Black women play in this with how we show up, period, in the community, but then also show up for, and as you said, with Black men?
Here's a really interesting illustration. And I've been thinking about this, especially with like my older adult clients. And so, as I said before, there's usually a realization that happens before we get to the work of what they really want to do. And we were going through one of my exercises, and this helps people understand where the growth mindsets come from, where the nuance of life comes from, and where we ignore the things that are come very natural to us because of all of the roles, all of the experiences that set up our belief systems. And what typically happens, because this is an exercise about the self, is you have a realization about you, about something you weren't offering yourself. And so one of the women who were going through this exercise, it was just like the light bulb just went off. And she says, like, I had these things all along, but I wasn't giving it to myself for me. I've been giving this to everybody else, but I didn't know that what I thought I was missing in life wasn't with me all along. And then there's usually a statement that comes after that. Two. One is, oh my God, how have I been showing up for my children? Or another one, how have I been showing up in my relationships? And then it's like, okay, I modeled this for my children. I have to fix this. I became this and I have to fix this and blah, 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 blah. What do I do? And the number one response that I always tell my older adult clients, give yourself permission to work on yourself. This is what that invitation is for. Because again, a lot of times, whether men or women, we tend to have a two perspective when it comes to wanting someone to do what we want them to do. The
Yeah.
best way to mirror what it is that we want other people to experience for us is for us to check our own behavior, deal with what we need to deal with, and then become an example for with. And what I mean by that is, as I was sharing with this older adult woman, I said, if you show to yourself what your new reality is, all your other relationships, you're inviting them to do it without telling them you have to do it this. And you have to literally, because we learn by action and modeling rather than someone scolding us and telling us. And at the premiere for our pilot at DCTV, all generations of her family were there. Was 3 generations. They're looking up at each other like, this is why oh my. She'd been married for over 50 years, and it was the first time that anybody ever heard her particular story. And so as they're watching her shift and change, they also change. And all she was doing, just becoming a richer, more vibrant version of herself, that energetically invites other people to go on that journey if they want for themselves. But it's that with factor, and it's not telling someone who they should be, when they should be it, how they
Yeah.
should. And it gives folks permission to do them and discover things on their own, in their own way. And after that, her sons come back to her and they're like, yeah, I'm watching you have some questions about this and you're reflecting on this. I realize I need to treat my wife better. So here it is, and again, I'm saying this very respectfully, the matriarch of the family literally just doing what she needs to do for herself,
Yes.
invited these other men to also do that because we pay attention. We notice.
Let me
Go ahead.
because see, this is so rich. Because as you were saying that, so much of, especially the convoluted conversations on masculinity and femininity, if I were to pull something out, her showing up in her feminine, nurturing herself first, loving on herself first, cultivating this fullness. Because even when we were talking about with, I heard WITH, but also WIDTH. So the full side, right? Fully, literally filling out your life then triggered their masculinity. It activated their masculinity of, wait, am I taking care of things? Am I properly protecting and providing space for my wife to show up fully? Because I like this version of my mom. That's cool. She's seeing herself. That triggering, I think, is so important because we always do feel like, no, I gotta tell you how to try. I gotta do that. Sometimes you really do just need to be.
Kaylin, after her husband saw this in our follow-up session after the screening, I could just cry just sharing this. She said he went home and he cried for a week because he had no idea. Although again, in community with his partner, he never knew her story. And because he didn't know her story and he had an opportunity to hear it in a way in which it came from her own experience, to that protecting aspect that you just shared, he wanted to know how he could not only show up for her to be a better protector, but he wanted to also know how he could show up for himself so he could offer her that. And that blew my mind because here it is. This project was about supporting older adults.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the multi-generational aspect. Yes, that was there strong. I had no idea what it would then do for the partnerships and the marriages.
Yeah.
Blew my mind.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much because if you're going to be married for the long haul, you're marrying all the versions of folks who that have been, that are, and that will be. And so if you married a man because he made a lot of money and he did this and this, or he was always the person I could lean on, well, what happens if, unfortunately, that person becomes temporarily or permanently disabled and they can't make the same type of money that they made? Are you ready to be there for that version of that person too? What happens when that person loses a parent and it breaks them down and they don't know how to show up and protect other people emotionally because they feeling really vulnerable and exposed now? I love the fact that both of the people in your example were willing to grow together as they grew into new individual versions, right? Because there are always three people in a relationship. It's like you each have an identity, but then a relationship has an identity too. Mm-hmm. And what typically happens is that as individuals are growing and evolving, the marriage is breaking down because y'all weren't ready for that corporate identity to look like that. And I love that even through perhaps the pain, the confusion, the surprise of seeing these new versions of themselves, that now they have a chance to build even more oneness and togetherness as a couple. And that is so important. And I wish that for all Black men. Yeah. That when you can't be the ladies' man, right? Or like the gigolo man of your teenage years and youth, that you still think you have value in your 30s and 40s. That when you can't be the money man handing out dollars to all of the nieces and nephews and paying for everybody this and that and paying everybody mortgage, that you still know that you have value. That when you aren't the executive anymore and you retire and now you're like, well, wait, what do I do every day? Right? 12 hours a day, that you still know you have value. When your body give out on you and you can't cut everybody grass and use your van to move everybody in and do that you still know you have value. I want them to see that, but I also want us as a community to know that there is value there too. Because if not, we create generations of invisible men. They're physically there, they're alive, they got breath in their body, but we don't even think of them. They don't even show up in the lexicon of the family. They don't even show up in the picture of the family because we ain't been listening to nothing that they said. We don't see them. We don't acknowledge them. We don't nurture them. We don't affirm or validate them. They just there.
Yeah. And also another piece that we didn't touch on, I want to be very supportive and sensitive to, is for, relationships and couples that aren't in heteronormative relationships.
Yes.
That are in Black men that are in same-sex relationships. Yes. Or define it for whatever titles, expressions that they choose to use, or even Black men as well who have a different identity, same gender loving individuals as well. Yes. That's a whole other construct and role that I just want to.
I'm so happy you said that. Somebody, it was a thread on social media. It was a post and somebody put up, they said it as a joke and everybody was laughing, but people were like really giving their flowers to their gay uncles. I can't remember what the post itself said, but it was like, shout out to my uncle at the family function who they like is his roommate. Oh, I know it was like two celebrities who were hugging. They do this all the time. And they were like, this your uncle and his roommate of 30 years. And so everybody was like, right. And so it was like gay men in there like, yeah, right. That's his boo. And everybody else was laughing. But then people started getting real serious and was like, shout out to my uncle so-and-so who made sure that all the kids had school supplies coming back, who made sure that all the nieces and nephews could be taken care of, who made sure that we could get moved into college, who took up us because our daddies wasn't there. And they was the surrogate daddy to everybody, even though they had a whole part of their life they could never even be open about in this family because of homophobia. And I love you, Uncle. I mean, it was like crazy. You
Wow.
could tell people was probably crying writing some of this stuff.
Hmm.
I love you, Uncle So-and-so. Rest in peace, Uncle So-and-so. I appreciate you. Then you had the uncles who some of them hopped in and was like, yeah, like, it was hard not being able to be fully myself, but I never wanted my nieces and nephews to feel like they didn't belong. And it was just,
Wow.
again, it was such a mixed bag in this comment section, but that stuck with me for a very long time because I have men in my family who never felt accepted, who were outright mistreated by some of the members of our
Yeah.
family because of their sexual orientation. And they were amazing humans, including that, right? It's not outside of that. Like, even in spite of no, that's a part of who
Right.
you are as a human, period. Like, we ain't finna leave that out. You get to be who you are in all aspects.
Absolutely.
And if we don't make space for that part of Black manhood to exist too, we eliminate the possibility for Black men to know how to connect with each other, be vulnerable, appreciate difference, appreciate the spectrum of Black manhood. And that too is a disservice to our community.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it any better than also experiencing that as somebody who is a gay Black man. It's exactly spot on.
And it is so interesting. And I'm glad we're ending on this note because being a Black man is not just race and gender. I have a model that I use, particularly in my DEI trainings, but it comes up honestly in my other leadership trainings too,
Mm.
about the dimensions of identity. And there are 50 plus. And I have this graphic that I use, and I make people as pre-work do a worksheet where they have to write out what I call their dimensional traits. And
Mm.
get scared out of their mind because it's a fillable PDF. I never asked them to see it. I ain't never told them they had to say, is anybody going to see this? Who going to know that? And it's like, no, it's literally for you to fill out. And there are some people who still refuse to fill it out. I didn't do it because I don't know, it made me uncomfortable. And
Mm.
it's asking things like trauma history, substance usage, childhood religion, socioeconomic status, disability status, caregiver status, right? Like, some things that you cool with being open with, some things that people automatically want to categorize you as, whether it's race, gender, or whatever. But then it's the other things that we try to hide real well, and we
Oh, yeah.
never want anybody to know. And what I use that as is the icebreaker activity to say, well, how did it feel for you to fill that out? And like I said, some people like, I wasn't filling that out. And I was like, yeah, but it was for you to, I still wasn't putting that on paper. I'm like, right. So you see how uncomfortable it was for you to think about having to put down that you drink 10 times a week? You see how uncomfortable that felt for you to think about having to reveal to somebody that maybe you've been incarcerated before as
Mm.
a part of your trauma history? That's how some people have to feel every day for things that they can't hide. And
Wow.
you are a part of that experience of exclusion.
Hmm.
And that right there, putting them in that place of discomfort, even without explicitly saying it, that sets the tone for the whole training. And we don't have hardly any problems talking about racism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, because they just saw how uncomfortable they got. I don't have to tell them and do a whole bunch of explaining. Don't you see? No, I know you see it because you just had that. You sat there shaking in your boots for a week doing this pre-work, thinking I was gonna out you about whatever outing you means, and I was never gonna do that.
Come on,
So
Kayla.
listen, I don't play with folk. That I'm telling you, that one right there, it sets the tone, and we need more experiences like that because again, there is a spectrum of Black manhood that we haven't even begun to access or acknowledge as a community. And we are quite literally perishing because of it.
And I hope that these conversations are inviting people into action and not reaction
Yes.
from what they're seeing, especially if things are making them feel uncomfortable, that maybe is an invitation to growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you,
Thank
Clay. Thank
you.
you so much for showing up today. And when I say show, I really mean showing up, not just being present, but truly showing up. I hope that you all who are listening, no matter when you end up seeing this, that you get value out of this. But most important, I hope it causes you to question yourself because that's always needed too. Let us know down in the comments. What are some of your thoughts? What are some of the nuggets you pulled from this? What are your experiences as a Black man? And how do you want us to show up for you in the community in ways that are much more nurturing and affirming? Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks, y'all. Bye.